Max Gawn, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well, and welcome back to another episode. As we're at the midweek point, not just of the season, let's be honest, we're over the halfway point of that. We're also at a really fascinating week of the multi-buy rounds. There is 1 week to go. That means 3 trades a week available to you across the formats. Use them or lose them in AFL Fantasy, while Dream Team and Super Coaches, you can get up to 14 trades if you still have any of those very rarefied trade boosts available. Because it is a multi-buy round, you have got 6 teams off the bye. You've got Brisbane, Hawthorn, Collingwood, Melbourne, Freo, North Melbourne. Only 18 of your players on field will count. Those teams missing are blue dots. You can hold them for the week. You can go and, if you wish, you can go and put your captaincy on them if you ever have a great vice captaincy score, or you can trade them as the week goes on. But that's how the buy rounds work. Before we get any further into this episode, got to welcome my guest on board this week. I got Kane back. Hello, mate. How are you?
Very well, MJ. Yeah, we're through. We're nearly through. Last buy round, usually the easiest, I would say, just with the options that people have got. But I think the unknown as we record now, MJ, is always what a team's going to bring. Because we know in the buy rounds, it's not so much the guys that you knew had the buy that get you into trouble.
Yeah.
It's how many of those guys were you banking on that don't get up, and not so much even the cows. It's Darcy Parish confirmed today that he's going to miss. Those are the ones that really, really sting, because not only were you banking on a score, you were banking on a ton.
Yeah.
Or even in a Parish's case, he's a guy that you would potentially look at throwing a VC on a lot of the time.
Matchup, too.
So that's what really hurts. We've got a little bit of team news, which is great as we record now, just hours before the bulk of teams come out. And it probably is nice in a way when we come off that round 13. It's always an elongated round, isn't it, MJ? Which is really tricky. When the footy starts on a Thursday and finishes on a Monday, you're always a little bit scared of what's to come. So it'd be nice tonight, 1 game tonight, get the bulk of the teams. We'll wait for the Sunday squads to be finalised tomorrow, but we should have by tonight all the information we need.
I agree.
And yeah, it's been a big week of news. It felt like last week was a bit of a carnage round. And some of that carnage has spilled over, unfortunately, into our trade plans this week.
Probably the biggest bit of carnage that might not have an immediate impact to your scoring this week, but may impact the trade plans you choose to make, is that Max Gawn, who's been far supreme the best ruckman so far this year, he's had patchy moments, to say the least, this year, with some good scores and some great scores and some okay scores. But now it's confirmed, not only will he miss at least 2 games, the club are very clear that he'll miss a minimum of 3 games. It's also been speculated by the club as many as 5, while some media reporters have come out and said, look, normally this kind of injury is a 6 to 8 week injury. So it's a really interesting one, Kane, isn't it? Because teams were probably planning to not have him this week anyway, with him and the Demons on the bye. But it does get tricky of the amount of trades you've got left in the limited trades. Can you afford to trade him and hold him? What's your depth and your bench cover like? I'm sure we'll talk about some relieving news that's also popped today that might aid in that. But then also to that, how much is your side improved from a fortnight ago from when you started through the multi-buy rounds? A combination of all these elements do become the pressure cooker for what coaches do or don't do with Gawn this week.
Yeah, that's what's really challenging. And this is one of those ones where it really does depend on your team makeup as to what you can do. So I guess if we start with that, MJ, you've got obviously Gawn in your ruck line.
Yep.
What does the rest of your ruck line look like? Is it a Sean Darcy? Is it a Witts?
Bruce.
Is it a Bruce?
Yeah.
Hayes?
Yeah.
Is it an English?
Dixon.
Yeah. I think that's what gets really challenging, is if you've got a ruck line that already had, Gawn and English and Witts, and that was sort of something you were thinking you were going to, swing English forward and have that sort of setup. It gets tricky this week because you don't want to trade into Darcy on his bye.
Nope.
And again, if you're really just trying to fix a hole, going to Teakle, as nice as that is, while it gives you some flexibility, it does require a restructure, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Teakle's not a like
No.
with Gawn. That's what's going to be the challenge with teams is I think a lot of people thought, and this is probably where it is really format dependent. If we start with Supercoach, that's where the rucks really come into their own, isn't it?
Yeah.
That was probably a format where you'd say, if we're going, who's the best scorer? Wits?
Yep.
Gawn?
Mm-hmm.
That was sort of your 1-2 rucks
Mm-hmm.
with Darcy and Bruce bringing up the rear.
Yep.
And you had the luxury of playing English in the forward line. Now, where I think that flips is in DT and AF. With no Gawn now, I think you're better off having English in the ruck line and bringing in your Bontempellis, your Parkers, your Cornelios.
You're saying the F6 is a stronger option than R2. Yeah.
I think so, MJ, because when I look at the rucks in that format of AF, they're not very appealing, are they? Outside of English, who I think most people had in their plans or in their sides anyway. You start looking at, okay, well, Darcy Cameron's not an option. He's on his bye this week. Now, if you've got him, that's a great luxury that you can swing him into that ruck line and open up, almost any other position in your team to trade in. That's a great spot to be in. He's been a pick that just keeps paying off, doesn't he, MJ?
That's the dream, isn't it? I know a lot of people, myself inclusive, across a few formats, it was, all right, Cameron, you're out. You've done your job. I'm jumping off a week or two before Grundy gets back. Well, now you're in the position. You've got the link available. Gawn now can become any premium probably across the line that you're desperately chasing. And you can now wait a couple of weeks for Cameron. And if Grundy comes back, cool. Reevaluate where Gawn may or may not be at that point. So you're right. Cameron owners, let alone people that may have or may be trading into Teakle or have English, they do feel like they're the ones that are in a slight advantaged position right now in contrast to the field.
Absolutely, MJ. That's 100% right. If you're already an English owner, that's great. You've got someone that you can swing in to cover Gawn. But I think the way people were set up with their buy rounds is that a lot of people had two premium rucks, just say it's a Gawn and a Darcy.
Yep.
And they already had English in that ruck line just to take advantage of having extra scorers and using cash cows in different lines. Now, where Teakle really comes into his own is if you are looking for a downgrade. Because the beautiful thing about the downgrade with Teakle is he's basement priced, he's ruck for DPP, and then it allows you to go a cow in another line to Teakle, and Gawn can go to someone else. You know what I mean? You can go to anywhere in the side. But I think you've almost got to start with what is the ruck combos you want. As I said, in Supercoach, it feels like if you're going top, you want English and you want Wits.
Yep.
In DT,
I don't feel confident. I don't like. Yeah. If I was, English is clear.
Yeah.
But
in both.
In both. But for me in AF and DT, I go, if you were looking at upgrading to a completed set and forget rucks by this point, I'm confident in none, which is why I think that point you made before, which is I would rather now at this point in time move English as my planned R2 for the season. Teakle, who we've already alluded to, has been confirmed to name by Port Adelaide. He's your easy move, whether it be Dixon at R3, whether it be who else? It could be Hayes is still available, let alone a dead or near dead cow that I never would probably normally trade into in your forward line. But if it's going to open up the movement, do it. Because to that point, your F6, your worst forward in DT and AF, is at least comparable, if not weekly better. We've seen the variants of Darcy. We've seen the variants of O'Brien. We've seen a relatively slow 2 or 3 weeks from Wits. So I'm 100% with you. I think English at 2 for me in those formats. And if and when you get an opportunity with a Grundy back, with a Gawn back, trading back, fine. But for me, I think that's the play.
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing, MJ. If we say in Supercoach we're comfortable with a combination of English, Wits, and Darcy, I would say that's 3 that you're comfortable with your premium. Yep. Now, obviously, as we mentioned, Teakle can be that great R3. He gives you some cover this week. If you're a Darcy owner, great. He comes on for you this week, gives you an extra few points. But AF and DT is where it gets really fascinating for mine. If we lock away one of the ruck positions as English, that's great. If you don't have English and you've got Gawn, I think that's where you're going.
Yes.
Now, after that, again, your first point of call, because let's just factor in, MJ, that you've got English at 1, you've probably got Teakle at 3. That's
Yes.
probably your plan.
Yes.
That's probably where you're working towards. Now, that second slot in AF is where it gets really interesting for mine. Because unless you have Darcy Cameron in your forward line and you can swing him in,
Yep.
if you don't have Darcy Cameron, it gets really, really challenging.
Yep, I agree.
Because Cameron's on a bye.
Yep.
And as you mentioned, every week that goes by is a week closer to Grundy coming back in. Sean Darcy is on a bye this week. And now we start getting into, do we go back to Bruce? Do we go Nankervis?
Yep.
Do we go
O'Brien?
Jared Witts?
Yeah.
Do we go O'Brien? And that's a really tricky spot because we have to have 3 rucks. That's the issue, I think, MJ, that people are running into this week. If they already had a setup of Gawn, English, and Teakle, what do you do? And that's not an uncommon...
No, it's a very
common... Because a lot of people last week wanted to maximize their downgrade. That's why Teakle's already in a few teams already.
Yeah.
We knew a lot of the communities just said, oh, I want this because that's my setup. Everyone was working last week, MJ, weren't they, in Supercoach?
Yep.
They were going to have 2 of Witts, Gawn, and Darcy.
Correct.
Teakle at R3, English in the forward line. That was the setup that everyone... Yep. So Teakle's already in. And that's why I say in AF and DT, I find it really tricky. If you've got English in one of the ruck spots, Teakle at the other, who are you getting this week to replace Gawn and fill that spot? Because that's the thing, you have to have a ruck. Unless you've got the luxury of Darcy Cameron swinging in there, which is great, and some coaches will have that, and I think that's what you do. If you're a Darcy Cameron owner,
decision made,
and you can swing him in there, now the whole field's at your disposal. You can grab a back, mid, or a forward. But MJ, I think we've got to spend some time helping these coaches that are in that predicament. Are they going Mark Blitzart? Are they going O'Brien? Are they going Nankervis or Bruce if he's named?
Well, and I think that's the dilemma. I wouldn't go Riley O'Brien this week, although in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy, he feels like one of the best available to you, and it is picking from a low crop. He's coming up against Jared Witts this weekend, and while the Crows do have a dream fixture, and we'll talk about that club as we look at the 6 teams coming off the bye in a second, if you look at the numbers of what rucks against Jared Witts have done, at hitouts, he monsters them. Now, where O'Brien will more than likely try to dominate is his movements around the ground. But I still have very little confidence he's the right guy. So for me, that becomes where we've talked a lot about trading Gawn. I think in AF, it's an immediate, absolutely no-brainer. He's out this week with the bye. We know he will miss at least 2 more. So in AF, trade. Go nuts, and we'll look at the options. There is a strategic play, though, where you could look to hold for at least 1 more week with Gawn to open up the variables of options. And by that, I mean Darcy now becomes an option to trade into that is not for you this week. You'd bank to not have him anyway. It all depends on what's your strategy, how risk averse you are. Are you focused on leagues? Are you focusing on rankings? These become the elements. And so while we've talked a lot about the options to trade out Gawn, and we should talk about some more in a sec, don't forget that you weren't going to have him anyway. Can you structurally make some aggressive moves anyway, so that next week, if there's more information about where he's at, you now have more defenders, mids, forwards on the field. You've got maybe another set of team selections that you can look at. And then, as I alluded to, the fact that you now have, well, how far away is Brodie Grundy? Is Cameron still a viable play or not? Probably not, but is he? Is Luke Jackson the play you want to get as a ruck forward? Is it Sean Darcy? What are North Melbourne doing? Goldstein's been amazing, especially in Supercoach, since Cherry's gone down injured. He's been one of the picks of the year that's been really unheralded as a ruck forward for us as well. So there are options to look at and to discuss, but for me, it always comes down to those plays. But if we're talking about rucks this week, the best of a bad situation if you can't get English because you've already got him. The best of a bad bunch, and I don't like it long term, is Nank.
Yep. And again, that's the unique situation, MJ, for those coaches. And we'll spell that again. If you've already got English and you've already got Teakle and Gawn was your middle ruck there, what is your options really? As I said, it can't be Sean Darcy.
No.
It can't be Darcy Cameron. If you don't have that luxury to swing them in, that's where I think Gawn could be a genuine hold for a lot of people.
Yeah.
If it's just extra cash in bank,
Yeah.
you might be able to hold and just open up that option to Darcy. Now, the funny thing when you look at Darcy is Nank's actually outperforming him anyway. And looking at the team sheets,
it's a good matchup this week.
We're gonna have to act quickly by the time this comes out. But Soldo's out of the team, so you got a solo Nank against
DeConning,
Tommy DeConing, and Jack Silvani.
Yum.
So for me, that's where I'm going. If I have to, if I'm really forced into, I need a ruck. As I said, if you've got Darcy Cameron, you can swing him in, and you've got the whole.
If English is in your forward, you've got options to move. If you've got Teakle, you've got options.
If you've already got a Darcy, you're already set. You can make those moves.
Correct.
But there's going to be some people that say, I have to get a ruck.
Yes,
I have to.
I think Nank's the one,
and I think it is Nank. What about if you got all the options, MJ? Because that's where it does get a bit more fun.
Well, I think that's where we might even let's look at some of the 6 teams that have come up there, because if Gawn can now be your ticket to a premium again. It all depends on what's the team look like, what's the format you play, how many trades have you got available, what's your focus, is it league or rankings? These are the caveats of variations, because if you're league focused and you're clear and supreme in your league and you look going, oh, I don't have Gawn this week, even if I don't have him 3 weeks, I'll drop 1 or 2 games. It won't make no difference. Okay, well, now that trade becomes really valuable off the back of the year. But if rankings is the goal, I don't see how for the majority of teams, holding Gawn's going to help you with your ranking. I really don't. So it becomes a trade. So let's look.
And it might even give you an extra number this week, MJ, because
That's
a lot
right.
of coaches were banking on not having another number. So to pick up another player in the buy rounds is never a bad thing.
Never a bad thing.
Especially if it's going to be a premium, like that could just be another 60, 70. And if you're a short, 110 points.
Well, and like you said, there's no Darcy Parish this week. People traded into him last week and are now getting 30 points, 50 points over a fortnight. And there's nothing you can do. I think if you're a Parish owner, you just got to suck it up and cop it, because he will be back next week, according to the club. And so it's like, well, it's just been a bad
luck.
Bit of luck.
No, those are the ones that kill you.
Yeah.
That kills you. It's a 150, 200 plus point swing.
Yes.
On another premium.
Yeah. If you had gone a Cornelio, albeit in a different level in line, or a Kelly, who was a bit more of a top price premium, or anybody that had a good week last week, you're already 70 to 80 points up, let alone what comes this week. So that's what it is. Well, let's talk about the Crows then. Let's kind of go through the 6 teams that are off the bye and help people find someone that might be a Max Gawn option. I've got kind of 4 names of Crows you could look at, and keen to get your take. I think the most overtly obvious one is Rory Laird. He's just been brilliant for the better part of 2 seasons now in that role. This year, his lowest score of the year was in his round 3 game against the pair in the showdown, where he went, I think it was like 90 in fantasy, 93 in Supercoach. He's on this run of 9 consecutive Supercoach tons. He's got 7 AFL fantasy tons. And then he's got the dream fixture of 2 matches against North Melbourne. There's a matchup against West Coast to come, and Hawthorn, who, let's be honest, they're not going to be tagging Rory Laird because he's just not a damaging player in terms of the way he uses the football. He's not precise and Bontempelli-esque. So I think for me, he's one. Jordan Dawson's been brilliant in the back line for us and has barely dropped under 90 all year across the formats. Ben Keys is an interesting one. He was ranked 13th in Dream Team in fantasy last year, 23rd in Supercoach last year. Had a bunch of 130-plus scores across the formats to start the year, and has then been a bit slow. I think it's an AFL fantasy play for me. I know he's been good in Supercoach, but he's 100K cheaper than Laird, and he hasn't dropped under 84. And so for me, if you're kind of trying to squeeze a bit of money, I don't mind him there. And then maybe a bit of a left field one for Supercoach is Tex Walker. It's coming off a 150 against the Eagles. We saw what he did early last year, and then it's coming back to that fixture. 2 North Melbourne games, 1 West Coast game. Hawthorn game in there. They're not easy wins, Hawthorn, from that perspective, but to certain key positions across the field, they have been bleeding points. So the Crows have done most of their top 8 teams at the front end of the year. The fixture does open up for them. So is there any of those Crows or any others that for you really think is something to look at?
Oh, Laird, MJ, if you've got the cash, he's just rock solid,
Yeah.
isn't he? Ever since he's moved into the midfield in 2020, he's pretty much been 110 to 113 in DT. He's even had stretches that even exceed up to near the 120 mark for 6, 7, 8 weeks. And Supercoach, he's pretty much a 120 guy.
Yeah.
So I think if you think you've got enough cash to complete your team, why skimp? Why skimp if you can go straight to Laird?
You'd be a decent captaincy saviour at the end of the round too.
And there's a reason a lot of these type of players have better back halves of the year.
Yeah.
The weather, a bit slippery, the game slows down a bit. He's a tackler.
Yep.
He ferrets the ball out. He plays in a team that he's not going to get any attention.
No.
I think he's a guy that there's no real value on his head anymore.
No.
It's pretty much you get what you pay for. And maybe you could question the ceiling. He's not a big 130 plus type of guy. He's very much a great captain option, isn't he, MJ, in the sense that chase a dangerous VC or an upside VC and let Laird come in and
Safety
give
net for you
between 105 and a 120.
It's very Clayton Oliver-ish, isn't it? Across the formats is very rarely will you be hurt, let alone disappointed.
Yeah, you'll be hurt with maybe a 90.
Yeah.
You catch a 90 every now and then, but he's a very, very safe guy. I do like your Keys pick. I guess the concern with Keys is those couple of those big scores were
without crowd
when there was no Laird.
Yeah.
And then you look at, that's still really solid. Like I know
there's nothing there that makes you scream, I'm really confident of the 110 run on the way home, is it?
No, but he has an upside.
Yeah.
So he's one of those guys that I look at that, that scoring and, you say the first 6 weeks he's going at 118. The next 6 he's gone at 94. There's no reason to say he's not going to do it, but you're very much chasing a bit of a point of difference there. I don't think there's as much to say, yep, this is the reason why.
Yeah.
He did cop a couple of little knocks, and I think the bye's good for him, but I think there's a few other guys we might talk about shortly that maybe present a little bit more.
I think you're right on that. Well, let's talk about the Cats then, if there's no real other Crows to look at. There's probably 3. You probably could have put Dangerfield in the mix, but the club have all but confirmed he's going to miss this week, I believe, just based on some of the press conferences. So I think there's 3. I know you're a big fan of Cam Guthrie, so I might leave him to you to kind of talk into in a sec. Mitch Duncan's the value forward to go and chase. He finally showed something in that round prior to, but I would feel more
There's
confident.
A big flag on it though, wasn't it, MJ? If you watched the game, it completely coincided with Stewart off.
Correct. I'd much
so that was
rather
the
go
thing
to
for me
Cogs.
that I think you've lucked into a score there.
I agree.
At Marvel, Tom Stewart went down.
They need to play through a
scoring
player.
spiked.
Yeah,
and it was against the Dogs. It just fell perfectly for him. So I have been a Duncan owner, so I've watched him really closely. Just doesn't seem to be moving with the same freedom. Big patches on the pine.
Yeah, he's a block scorer, isn't he, now? Where he'll be at 40 points at quarter time and 45 points at halftime.
Yeah, he's very much comes in waves. And it's now the reason I understand some of the appeal is West Coast should be a game where
it feels like a gravy game. Yeah.
Because if a game gets tight, for the Saints game, I recall in the fourth quarter, he barely did anything because there was no need for that. Now, they love getting him the ball and he's a great user and all that stuff. But when you think of the old Duncan, it was actually very inside, a lot of tackles.
That's right.
And it was a very high mark game. Yeah. And now that is happening to a degree, but when Stewart's out there, he absorbs a lot of that, and rightfully so. So I think Mitch Duncan, if he's all you can get to, great.
Sure.
But I wouldn't be expecting much more than a 90.
Yeah, I think, and again, it's different across the formats. If it's a Cornelio versus a Duncan, who in some formats, they're not too far apart, you've got to go Cornelio just based on role and what we've seen. So I agree. He's there if he's the best you can get to, because you should get a week 1 reward. The only other narrative, and we will talk about Tom Stewart, is if you believe teams now put significant time into Tom and the Cats coaching staff and adjust to play through Mitch. I think it's a stretch of a narrative, but that for me is the only way. With Tom, he was heading into round 12 before that concussion. The most informed defender in the game was, and he was, what did he do? He went 187, 74, 113, 122, and 174 in Supercoach. 93, 109, 94, 169, 157. He was the most informed guy. The question with him is, how much of a flag is put on him? How much do teams have the cattle to be able to make him accountable? And then the third is, he's such a good playmaker and reads the football and the defensive half arguably better than anyone in the game right now. Would it even make a difference? Those are the things, aren't they?
Yeah, I think he's a guy that a lot of people will be wrestling with. I want to do an upgrade this week. I want to complete my backline or complete my team holistically.
Yeah.
What's 50K? If this is the guy I want,
yeah.
Yes, I know he'll drop a bit of cash most likely in the next 2 weeks, but that's 2 weeks without having a premium. So I think when you watch the game, yes, there's a percentage of his disposals you could take off him, but a lot of it is the Cats just recycling possession. It's not really actually moving the ball into a more dangerous space, and he's just the one that's in that position. He's getting 10 plus intercepts a game, so that's his own doing anyway. So for me, he's a gun.
Yeah.
If you need an upgrade, I don't think you'll be disappointed. I think sometimes the challenge is with a super easy matchup, which West Coast is.
Yep.
That's going to come down to some junk time.
Yep.
That's going to really make the difference between, does he get put on the pine for the last 6 minutes of the game, finish on an 80, 90, 100, or is he out there at the end and could get a 130, 140?
Yep.
Because you just don't know sometimes with these almost too easy matchups.
Yeah.
But I think for the run home, you like him.
Yep.
Geelong are right in the hunt. There's a lot of games down at GMHBA.
Yeah.
I don't think you can really flag him too much, MJ, maybe other than he's very expensive. If you need to save some cash and take a flyer elsewhere,
do you go Whitfield? Do you go, some of the others?
Yeah, you're going to have to make that call.
Yeah, that's good. Talk to me about Cam Guthrie, though, because I alluded about him. I know you've been keeping an eye on him across the year, because last year he was one of the best kind of value buys around this time of the year. What do you think Guthrie's going to turn for us over this final 10 weeks?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, MJ. He's got the well-roundedness coming back into his game a little bit, which is encouraging, which is sort of for him, it's sort of that 5 and 5. That he's getting 5 marks, 5 tackles.
Plus his 25 possessions, he's back.
Yeah, he's back amongst it. And when you look at his season, it's a funny one because the Cats, there seems like they're just starting to get going. They've had, the midfield's sort of moving around again. They're not really the same possessive team, which is what saw Guthrie really explode. But when you think about him, he's going at 95 across the season, and he hasn't really done much, has he?
No.
He's had a little hiccup here and there, like the Hawthorn game. That was his lowest score of the season. He could barely run after a couple of hits in that game. Did well to even sort of just finish the game out.
I agree.
And then, ever since then, he's going at 104. Now, that's probably what he is. So if you're getting him, just under 100, is that enough? And this is where it gets tricky. I would say in a DT format, you'd want more.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you don't want to lock yourself into a guy that's at best probably a 105. Now, there could be an instant reward this weekend. There could be a 140. But it does seem like a lot of that ceiling's been sucked away.
Yeah, it's true.
Which is tough, but that's the thing with ceiling games, MJ, is often they're only once or twice a year. So if you haven't seen one yet, I get the appeal going into a West Coast game of thinking, well, if this is the ceiling game, that's how you get your average up to 110 over a stretch. So I like him. I think he's at a price point, especially in AF, where people are going, if I save 100K here, if I save 100K here, and he can match a Laird or match a Mills or match a Brayshaw, which he can.
Yes.
We can in a stretch.
No question.
You're asking for 10 games. It's just always that worry with the Cats, isn't there? That there's a resting, there's something else that you haven't really planned for. But I think you're going into it saying this week and maybe for the next 5 weeks, you probably only want to own him for 5 or so weeks.
It doesn't feel like you want him in round 23 unless some variance.
No, it feels like to me, MJ, you're thinking if I can get a 125, 130 this week,
Yeah.
which is a lot, but if I can get an instant reward, and then he goes 100, 100, 100, by that point, I've probably got a completed side, and I'm looking at some luxury upgrades.
Yeah, can I get to a Jack Steele who'll be back by then kind of thing?
And then maybe by then he's gone up his 30 to 50K.
Yeah.
I get the logic of it. It's very much
team dependent.
You'd want to be mapping out. You'd want to be mapping out this week, and you'd want to be mapping out next week, and making sure that 100K is going to get you from a good player to a great player. Because if it's not, and you got cash spare, it's awfully tempting just to go to lead, just to go to a big dog,
Feel
even
safe,
a Trick Miller. So, but he's in that spot, MJ. I think in AF, if anytime you're in the low 800s with that type of capability,
you got to look at it.
You're going to attract a lot of people's eyeballs. So it's really interesting one.
Yeah, he definitely is. All right, you've already alluded to the Gold Coast Suns and their skipper, so let's talk about them. I kind of got three names that we might be worth looking at. One we've already talked around a lot at the start, which is Jared Witts. I don't think he'd be someone I'm happy to trade into in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy. I think we've seen the best of Jared already this year. We've had a couple of low games. He's not someone, like you said, my F6 versus my R2. If it's Witts in those two formats, I'm much more comfortable in my F6 to take him on. Supercoach, he's a beast in that format. He outside of Gawn is the only other guy, and Darcy, that I'd feel comfortable with. So absolutely a play if you're needing to make that move. I'm okay with that there. In AFL Fantasies and Dream Team, Brandon Ellis could be a play. He's got a bit of variation in his scoring, and I'll highlight his past 5 games. 106, 80, 54, 126, 66. Yo-yo player, all depends on how much Gold Coast dominate the game. But when we talk about fixtures, and we did this with the Crows, who do they have in the final game of the year? North Melbourne. In the 4th last game of the year, who do they have? West Coast. Who do they have coming off the bye this week? Adelaide. Who do they have in a month's time? Essendon. They have 4 of the easiest teams to score against. All of those teams you would suspect Gold Coast would have their way on the inside of the contest and by osmosis. The outside, he could pick up some of the beneficiary of Weller going down for the rest of the year with an ACL. He's certainly probably one of 4 or 5 candidates, whether it's Bose, Buderick. Do they bring Lemons in to play more accountable and free Markov up? Or there's options, so he's a guy. But it probably is only a DT and an AF format, given I don't think he hurts as much in Supercoach or is penetrating. And then the last, I think we've got to talk about Tuke Miller. He's down 100K across the formats, if not more in some others. He's since round 7. This is what he's done in Supercoach: 160, 122, 130, 59, 109, 167. While in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, not as cheap as he once was a few weeks ago, but he's still pretty cheap. He in the past, since round 7, has gone 140, 92, 128, 82, 105, 135. He again does feel like not as much value as you might have previously got, but still a mighty fine pick.
Yeah, he's almost the buy of the week in Supercoach, isn't he, MJ? That dog he scored is about to roll out.
Yep.
It was a weird game.
Yeah.
He just used the ball terribly.
Yep.
Honestly, he just had one of those games that you get in Supercoach sometimes where every time you make a mistake, it's at an important time. And anytime you do something well, it's not really weighted the same. It just happens.
Yep.
It just happens.
Yep.
And I think what he can do at the price, if you don't have him, you're grabbing him this week.
Yep.
Now, it's tough in AF because I look at him versus a Laird.
Yeah.
Right? And this is where
both could be the best captaincy score of the week, and they're in head-to-head games.
Yeah, and also they're quite different in the way they score. Like Miller has the ceiling. You know, he's got a big ceiling.
He's got 130s, 140s, yeah.
Yeah, whereas Laird, you know, he doesn't throw out 68s, Laird. You know, he doesn't throw out.
But he doesn't
80s.
go over 130 either this year.
Yeah, so that's why, you know, I think when people will be drawn, one, cheaper, you know, Miller is slightly cheaper than Laird.
Yep.
You know, we're only talking
50K.
30 odd K,
Yeah.
but it makes a difference.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you look back at last year, and this is always going to be something that, you know, gets people excited, isn't it, MJ? When you think back to last season, 126 off his bye in DT, 131 in Supercoach.
Wow.
Laird doesn't have
that
capability. He's probably at a 10-week stretch, probably a 120 guy in AF and maybe a 125. He's got a bit more upside in Supercoach because he's so inside and clean.
Yep.
But, you know, you're asking really for Laird to do that, for him to basically be a 120 every week and throw out a 160, whereas Miller can go 140, 140.
And
140.
has done this year, let alone last year. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people will be drawn to that. It should be a good matchup. It feels like something's building at Gold Coast in terms of a run home. And you'd think a bye would do him the world of good. But again, what do you want? Do you want a bit more upside? Do you want something a bit safer?
Yeah.
Now, I guess the thing you'd say with Miller is there is no possibility of a role change.
Nope.
I don't expect a role change for Laird, but you never know in the final 3 weeks of a season.
Yeah,
team not going to make the 8.
Get more chance.
Yeah, you know, it could just get thrown around a little bit.
That's fair.
But I think they're very, very close. And again, I probably would have to give the edge to Miller purely on the price difference.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. All right, 3 teams left to go, and then we'll hit some of our Patreon questions. We can move pretty quickly through West Coast. But Witherden caught people's eye early in the year, but in your ideal finished side, he's not the guy you want in, especially if you're moving via Gawn or you're freeing up cash from a Will Brodie, for example, or a Nick Dacos. Or if these are the guys you're moving off from into a Witherden, I want no part of it. The only Eagle I even semi-like, there's maybe 2, and it probably is only an AFL fantasy play, to be honest. It's Gaff and Kelly. And it's more just because you somehow believe that as the cavalry comes, they get back to 2019, 2020 themselves. And even then, I would not feel confident when you look at trying to find value across different lines and you go Gaff versus, say, so AFL fantasy, if we just stay in that format for a second, Gaff is 671,000. Whitfield is just 70,000 more. I know I say just, but I have much more confidence of even having to play Whitfield in my midfield rather than a Gaff. So there's
it's Salem next week, MJ. If you
key.
wait one more week, you're going to get Salem to 30k cheaper than Gaff with a defender status.
In AF, exactly. It's just
there's things like that. I just think West Coast, you steer clear.
Unless it's a cow that's going to get you through.
Of course.
There's nothing there. All right, let's look at the last 2 teams. Sydney, Callum Mills. Mr. 110 across the formats. Probably one of the safest VCCs every single week across the formats. Expensive.
Yeah.
But probably with one exception in the past 2 months, has not let you down. The other 3... Parker in the forward line, I don't see a world where unless we get something big in the round 18 DPPs or an injury hitting, that he's not inside the top 6 forwards, not just for the year, but from now to the end of the year. And then you've got the interesting defenders. You've got the historical Lloyd and hoping that he pops back. I don't have the confidence that he can match it with the big boys anymore, especially when you look at how good Doherty has been, Hewitt has been, Sicily, even across the formats, I think he's exceeded everybody's expectations. The value of Whitfield, you've already alluded to Salem coming back as a value. Crisp has been so good. Stewart has been so good. There's more that I could list.
I think we put a line through Lloyd pretty quick. MJ.
And Blakey's probably in the same spot. It feels like you're chasing in hope, but Supercoach could be the format for him just purely because of efficiency. But again, if I was to go,
he's off the mark. He's off the mark, isn't he?
It really is. You're banking on a narrative of things to happen that is just too hard to see. Because if we look at the best points scorers by average in Supercoach, you've got 5 already this year over 110. which is huge.
That's a high bar.
And you've got 13 over 100. And that doesn't include, just outside of that, Rich, Brayshaw, Blixavs, Hall, Ridley, Ryan, Pendlebury. They are all still 93 or above. And so for me, Blakey, I agree. I don't think you can spend too much time. It really does come down to Callum Mills. And maybe, as great as he is, the value of a Took this week might just be enough to make people not want to be able to get there.
Yeah, well, that's what makes Mills so hard, isn't it? MJ? I think in Supercoach, he's a bit more reasonably priced. He's in that conversation with a Laird. He's in that sort of realm.
Yep.
I think AF's the tough one.
Yeah.
Because those monster ceilings, they've kept that price so high. It's just
959,000.
Yeah, it's nearly 150k more than Guthrie. It's all this sort of stuff. But again, if you want ceiling, if you want a vice captain, he is the perfect vice captain because there is some volatility there.
But the ceiling is...
If you could pair him with a Laird, you'd almost be
dreaming.
The best combination because you chase the ceiling. If he goes under, 110, Laird will probably clean that up for you most weeks. So it's a big bite off. You don't get many chances to get a guy like that.
No, that's true.
I think, though, depending where you are, if you're, chasing, a lot of the guys ahead of you have already got Mills.
Yeah, you almost need to go away from him, don't you, and find the next one.
Yeah, I think you need to find a little bit more value, a little bit of someone different. There is a tendency for him to get swung around a little bit. We know he can play in defence. We know he can play more outside, inside.
It was that Richmond game where he was full back, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, so and he can still score in those roles, but it just feels like, it maybe is a move that if you're up the top, you're flying, your team's complete, and you're really in the thick of it.
And you're trying to negate.
Maybe it is a defensive move because he is a guy that, if you're getting a captaincy score of a 160 plus, which he can deliver, you can really be off the pace.
Yep.
So, but I think for most teams, at that price tag, it feels like you're chasing points that you've already missed.
Yeah.
I'd go somewhere else and see if you can maybe have a point of difference in your favour at a cheaper price and maybe just keep building that team out.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice. And then the last team, I've got 6 Western Bulldogs to name, but I think 2 of them we could almost write them out, almost for that point you've made, which is the top teams all have them and you're not helping yourself. And I'm alluding to probably Dunkley and McRae from the Western Bulldogs.
Yeah, popular starting squad guys, MJ, which is always interesting with these type of players is you've almost, I think with McRae, if you've almost don't have him now.
You want to keep that separation, don't you?
Yeah, you're probably going something different. He's at a price point now where he's sort of smack bang between the Uber, the top. He's not quite 600, but he's also not quite value.
Yeah. It's a bit no man's landy, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think Dunkley, let's be honest, if you're a serious team, you've got Dunkley.
Yeah, so they're down to 4. English we've talked about a lot. Again, this week it's English is the ideal. If you don't have him and you're a Gawn owner, problem solved. Really, isn't it? And you do want him
points and his cover. And that's the thing, like structurally, as we get to this point of the season, you need cover, you need some flexibility.
Yeah.
Now, in a way, you might have lost some flexibility as much as we like Teakle playing. Sometimes outside of this next week, there is some advantage in him not playing.
Yep, the VC. Yep.
It's nice. It's handy. It's handy to have some flexibility. He's just playing great footy. And I feel like across any line, and also the thing, MJ, with these guys is if Witts was to go down, you got some flexibility.
Again.
If you lost a 4, like just having DPP is never a bad thing. And to have someone that you can swing back and forth, because we know that's what really separates, and that's the only real way to climb rank in the back end, isn't it? If you can identify the Degoe of last year this year, you can identify the Tyron Thomas, and sometimes that's a ruck that gets an opportunity. So to have flexibility that you can swing them around, super important, especially when they're already a top scorer.
I agree. Then you've got the final 3 to talk about. Libba, Bont, and probably Treloar. Libba, Supercoach, yay. I don't think he's gone under 83 since round 4. So is about 540k in that format. Has had one score under 100 in the past 5 and that's a 92. And for his game style, he's the perfect guy in Supercoach because the dogs have to win. And so they're not going to fart around with his role. So I like Libba in Supercoach as a play. And then the other two, we kind of did talk about English. So is really Treloar and Bont. Both could work across the formats. Bont's probably better in Supercoach. If it's a 50-50 between the two, is it format and price that kind of define those two?
Oh, he just Bont's shoulder and body, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, he's so durable. So he'll do everything to get out there. But, we don't want just out there, do we?
No.
We want scoring. And to his credit, he still has scored well. I think the worry is looking at the fixture. If things don't go the Dogs' way,
as the year wraps, yep.
Is there really a need to play Bontempelli, say, the last 2 games?
If the year goes.
Like that's generally the things you have to think about. Because, there's some teams, and Adelaide's probably a good example of this, they're just going to keep going because they're just trying to get better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Every game they play as a group, that gets a bit better. You keep that going, you build momentum, you build some confidence, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But a team like the Dogs that not making finals is a disastrous season.
Yeah.
You're much better off to just reload all those sort of things and just put the year behind you. So I do worry about that stuff with Bont. Now, obviously on the flip side, there's no one with greater upside in that forward line.
Oh, of course.
If he goes, if
he's
he rolls and the
one,
Dogs win,
yeah.
He's a 125 guy.
Yeah.
Like, that's just what he can do. So I think you go him over Treloar.
Yep, I agree.
I don't think there'd be too many situations where people would be bringing in Treloar, because I think you like what Parker, as in a team that's in the hunt, more consistent, more durable.
Yeah.
Like, for me, that's where I'd be going.
I agree.
And yeah, Bont's a really, really tough one. Like, they'd want to win this weekend.
Yes, very
and
much
get
so.
that momentum building, because
the Wolves
it's red
come
hot
quick otherwise.
for the 8. It's red hot, and that's what can really hurt you. Those final weeks where you've probably got no trades.
Yeah.
You very rarely have much cover. And if it's splitting hairs, that's where, even for me, like, do you go Luke Parker because, he's going to have to be really injured to not be there at the end, because they're going to be fighting
for top 4
all the way to the finish line. So it's a really tough spot with the Dogs for mine, MJ.
I agree.
Really tough.
For reference point, the Dogs' final 5 games of the year are Melbourne, Geelong, Fremantle, GWS, and Hawthorn. So that grand final,
it's in their hands, isn't it?
It is in their hands, and they've got Hawthorn twice. And again, I don't see someone that is a matchup to stop him. They might try to run a Connor Nash with him from a physicality perspective through the midfield. But if it was a Bont v Nash at a stoppage, you're a Dogs fan, and you're
and you're talking over 10. You're talking over 10 weeks.
Yeah, over 10 weeks.
That's the thing. Like, you're just saying for Bont in 3 or 4 games, if Bont does his thing, there's 140 plus scores there, and he's very hard to keep. He always gets his ton in Supercoach, doesn't he?
Just finds a way, whether it be with an impactful contested possessions or some score involvements or something he's brilliant. All right, let's try to rapid fire through these questions from our Patreons. These are people that have loved the Coaches Panel, support the Coaches Panel every single month. If you love what you've got from the Coaches Panel this year and want some extra content as well, coachespanel.tv, all the links to join that. We'll fly through these. Ian McRae's got a Gawn question. The good news, Ian, straight out of the gate, mate, we've answered everything Gawn related to you. Stephen Summers has got an AFL fantasy 50-50 dilemma. Himmelberg versus Whitfield, please. Now, remember, there's about 100 and something K difference too. So it's not just, before I get your answer, Kane, it's not just the 1-for-1. It's the 1-for-1 and what else you can do. But in a 1-for-1, who are you liking?
Yeah, I think I'm Whitfield, even though the price.
Yeah,
you've just, like, Himmelberg, that was an incredible game. Like, that was a phenomenal
Unicorn
game.
game.
Again, you're trying to think, what's your number going forward? What's the number could Himmelberg, like, realistically go? When you think he's priced at 73, Whitfield's priced at 91 in an AF perspective.
Yeah.
is there 20? He probably gets within that 20 points for me. Like I've probably got Himmelberg at an 85. I've probably got Whitfield at a 95, 100. But do I really want to have to use another trade to get Himmelberg out? I'd go Whitfield, but he looks great back down there, doesn't he?
He looks really composed.
And the thing as well is he's got the kick-ins.
Yep.
And there's a lot of chipping and marking. So again, as you mentioned straight away in that answer, if you're doing something with the cash and you love that
combination,
a big discrepancy, I wouldn't be talking down Himmelberg at all because it's a definite role change. You think about what a Sicily did in the past, MJ, when he had this big switch. We've seen these big switches in the back half of the year.
Yeah.
And quite often it leaves us coming back in the off season and saying, geez, you got a guy here that did this in the run home, was going at 90. He's only going to be priced in the low 80s because he was a forward.
He's
so
the value, yeah.
I think there's there's clearly value there. But I want to be making sure that I'm using that 100K wisely if I'm going a Himmelberg over at Whitfield.
That's some good advice. Brendan's got a question about who we'd rather for Treloar or Parker on the run home in Dream Team. I think we kind of answered that.
Yeah,
before. Parker is the one.
On
Craig wants to know if you're trading Cameron this week, is it now trade Gawn and hold Cameron? Yes, is the answer to that, Craig. Exactly what you should do. Jason's got a question. It's not team dependent, but a lot of people are asking this question. Is Brodie of the Will variety a top 6 forward from now to the end of the year, especially with Fife coming back? There's a couple of people that want to know what's the impact of Fife. We've only seen one game. What was your take?
Yeah, well, I thought it didn't look like there was a major difference in terms of the way Brodie played. I think the more thing for Brodie is, and when I think about him going forward, is he's at a top price right now. What he is priced at, he's not going to do any better than that. So in my eyes, if you're going to move someone, like for example, MJ, I'll throw this scenario at you.
Sure.
If you think about, Paddy Lipinski, who I think a lot of people said, he's been a bit underwhelming, especially in AF. I might have jumped on after that round 1 big game. Mm-hmm. I'll run him to his bye and I'll move on.
Sure.
You think about Lipinski, he's 682. Will Brodie is 756. Like that's a sizable amount of cash.
Mm-hmm.
Last 3 weeks, there's only 3 points a week difference. So if you're going to ride someone out, I would say,
maximize
do you really
cash.
care if next week you've got Will Brodie or Pat Lipinski off their bye and you've got to carry them another week?
Potato.
I'd be taking that cash.
Yeah, I would too.
Especially when you think about, Brodie's break even is 99.
Yeah, it's harder for him to hold value. He's more likely to give you an 85 plus, but
yeah, but I just think
whatevs.
If you're going to sell, if you don't have any, if a guy sort of think Brodie is really an 85 to 90 guy at best
AF,
for me.
I agree. Yeah.
He's priced at 92.
Yeah, we'll sell.
I'm moving.
We'll
I'm moving, and especially as I said, when you think about it, if that 70K gets you from a Guthrie to Miller, or if it gets you from
Whitfield to Doherty or something,
whatever you need, I would just be thinking, going, what are they actually doing? Because you've timed it up beautifully. Yeah. It's almost the opposite of Petrarca, isn't it, MJ?
Yeah.
People are selling Petrarca.
Yeah.
And you think, and you put that great tweet up showing what's he done in wins, what's he done in losses.
Yeah.
Now, part of the reason there's a big discrepancy is typically when Petrarca plays well, Melbourne win.
Yeah, correct.
So it's a bit of, which is the cause there? Is it Petrarca playing well and Melbourne winning? Or is it the other way around? So you're selling at a low there. Like you're selling a Petrarca in some formats, MJ, the same price as Will Brodie, or close enough. So that's where I think you got to just take a step back and go, they both got the bye this week. I would much rather have a Christian Petrarca in my side than a Will Brodie who's just come out of a purple patch of form. So I didn't notice massive stuff in the role change. No. We know he's a low time on ground player. Yep. Fife will clearly build. That's the concern. But it's more for me. I think in the forward line,
he's done his job.
There's 100 guys. There's a Taranto coming back in the next couple of weeks. I doubt you have all of Bont, Parker. There's Dunkley. There's all these. There's all these sort of guys. Canelio's back in form now. You can reallocate. Maybe you say, 150K from Brodie to Himmelberg. I can make that move. I can make that cash. I can maybe get a Taranto in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
I just think it's never a bad thing if he's selling a guy that's not best 22.
Yeah.
In terms of our fantasy
Correct.
sides, clearly his best 22 knockers at a top price.
He's done his job, hasn't he? At the
top
start of the year, it was like his there was a stepping stone for 6 to 8 weeks. We got lucky. All the variables went our way. That meant we could hold him to the bye. He's done his job. You could see, as great as he is, you put a 2-time Brownlow medalist into that team, eventually that will start to hit the impact. One last question before we wrap up. Matt Dennis wants to know, Zorko, he's trading out, and understandably so, with that hamstring and on the bye. He's got 3 guys. He doesn't have a format, though. But I don't know if it matters, but we'll throw it out anyway. Doherty, Sinclair, Whitfield. Who do you like out of those 3? I think on points, it's got to be Doherty, doesn't it? Like most points from now.
It does for me.
But it's not
and
just
that's the thing, and it's a credit to Sinclair. Sinclair's been one of the most informed players across the formats, MJ. He's just been remarkable. He's just an incredible footballer. He's just so composed. He uses it so well. Doherty has that ceiling, though, especially in DT. How many times, MJ, do you go, oh, here's the low score, going to pounce, or I'm in trouble here as an owner? Like, no one pulls more 50, 60-point quarters out.
He's amazing.
To save a score or to take a score from a low 100 to a 130
like
to
last
Doherty.
week, yeah.
And that only happens more when you're dominating. You don't get to do that when you're losing.
No.
And it is a tough stretch for the Blues.
Yes.
But there is pockets of games where, okay, let's just get to quarter time here, guys, for 30 seconds, and Doherty gets plus 12, plus 18.
Yeah.
So for me, it's Doherty. I would have Sinclair next.
I agree.
The hard thing with Whitfield, and I watched him on Sunday, and it is tough. North Melbourne are really bad, MJ.
They were very bad.
They're really struggling.
The role was there, which is promising.
Yeah, it's just the movement.
Yeah.
Sometimes watching him run, it doesn't look like the old him. Now I'm not paying the old price.
That's the benefit, isn't it?
But yeah, I just would think, like, it's funny because part of me says he's more of an AF play because you've got the luxury of moving him out. And then part of me says, well, he's more of a DT play because you need to conserve your trades, and he's so much cheaper than a Sinclair, and he's so much cheaper than Doherty, especially in Supercoach too, MJ. He's 150 odd K cheaper than those guys. So I find it really hard to get a number. What number do I believe? And I think it probably is still in the mid-90s in DT. I don't think it's much more than that.
But there's a 100K gap in AF. You mentioned that format between Sinclair and Whitfield. And what does that 100K do for you next week, for example?
I think that's probably where you're convincing yourself. If you feel like 100K next week gets me from, a lower price mid-primo to a really strong mid-primo.
But what move can you make next week? Like, are you choosing to, for whatever reason, if you're going to get Teakle next week, for example, and you go, I'm doing...
Well, that's something people have got to consider.
What are my
really
two
closely.
trades next week? Because if you can still get that cash and then go, right, now I can get the Taranto, right, now I can get the Sean Darcy, right, now I can get even without...
That's why you got to have a look, MJ. And that's where sometimes the buys are a bit easier because, for example, if you want a Salem, like I think a Salem and a Whitfield are neck and neck. So that's why for me, I don't want to be locking away a defender spot and miss out on the bargain, one of the bargains of the year in Salem. So that's part of the forward plan. Now, we know with the buyers, another advantage is those guys price a lot.
Yeah.
So if you're planning for Salem, 655K in AF, okay, that's staying steady.
15K
what else?
Off day costs for those that are still holding him.
It's remarkable. Yeah. It's remarkable, and it's an advantage of that format's pricing that he gets that cheap because we know in a Supercoach and a DT that score's gone.
Yeah.
That terrible score in round one's out. So in short, I think I still have Whitfield. There's something
not quite.
Again, the game plan. The hard thing about UWSMJ is the game plan shifted to a game plan that should suit Whitfield.
Correct.
The hard thing is they've played it against West Coast.
Yep.
They were very good against Brisbane, so that's encouraging for the game plan. They ran out of steam, and they played it against North.
Yep.
So two of those are absolute
Monties.
duds, and they've dominated, and they've
done what they
slammed
should.
the numbers.
Done what they should.
So part of me says, well, let's see against the Dogs. Now that's somewhere between obviously a North and a West Coast and a Brisbane.
Yep.
That's a bit more in the middle. What can they do? I just think Sinclair's getting so expensive.
Sinclair feels a now or never, doesn't it? Whereas Whitfield, you go, if I don't get him, I'll just get Salem next week. That's why for me, I'm with you. If it's about points and cash doesn't matter, it's Doherty. If it's a this week and the cash isn't as important, go and get Sinclair. And if you still need value next week to round out the defensive unit, you've got a nice little play in Salem.
I think so. I think that's what gets hard for Whitfield MJ is that he's copped a lot of knocks.
Yeah.
I just have this feeling that, one more knock in the last few weeks, and they're not doing anything, this team. He doesn't have to. We know what Whitfield can bring. He just needs to be healthy. So, Doherty and Sinclair fighting for the 8, really fighting.
Yeah.
Again, we love Whitfield. It just seems like, is it going to be hammer and tong the whole way home? So for me, it's probably those top 2 guys, even though I'm paying a little bit more. But as you said, if we can just wait a week and you can get Salem and maybe you finish that forward line or midfield first.
Yeah.
I don't think you want to miss Salem. I think I'll just flag this now. I think next week a lot of people are going to take a Jaden Short down to a Salem if they're flush. I just think you're going to get the same scores.
For a very luxury trade, but less. Absolutely, if that's a way of making cash to make a move,
people might have stripped their benches, MJ, and I think that might be someone that people look at. So
I like that as a trade. Hey, mate, some brilliant work from you on this episode. Appreciate your work as always, my friend.
No worries, MJ. Thank you.
If you want to go check out some of the articles that have landed recently, you can at coachespanel.tv. It's also where you can get all the links to join our Patreon supporter group. By the time you're listening to this, teams are moments away or they're already out. Good luck as you head into round 14. We hope it goes your way, and we look forward to chatting to you next week on the Midweek Trade and Strategy Podcast.